So thank you very much for coming. Today we're going to talk about the Nabateans. And the way I introduce them is that they are the greatest civilization you have never heard of. Just to give you a taster of what's ahead. I'm on a journey from Petra in Jordan to Hegra in Saudi Arabia to discover the secrets of the Nabateans, an ancient and mysterious civilization with a spellbinding history. They're known for their dramatic cities of the dead, carved directly out of the cliffs. But I want to uncover the truth about who they really were and how they lived. Join me, Alice Morrison, for Arabian Adventures, The Secrets of the Nabateans on BBC News. And on BBC iPlayer, so I hope after you've seen this talk, you're going to be inspired to go back and watch the programmes. We're talking about the Nabateans, and this is a civilization that existed. It was founded, it's all very vague. It was founded between 400 and 200 BCE, and its zenith was kind of those next 200 years until the turn of the millennium. It was conquered in 106 by those pesky Romans who conquer everything, except for Scotland. So it was conquered by Trajan in 106. But this is the kind of, as geographers, you will all appreciate this, this is the map of roughly where it was. So you can see it's the Arabian Peninsula, particularly the northern end, up into Iraq, and then over into Palestine and the Sinai, with its main ports at Gaza and at Alexandria. Now, one of the things about today is obviously I'm giving you this talk about the Middle East and this region at a time when there's absolutely devastating war going on, where people are being murdered and killed and slaughtered for, as far as I can make out, no benefit to anyone. So I would just ask you to remember the people of this region in your thoughts, because there's very little any of us can do, but at least we can keep them at the forefront of our minds. But the good news about the Nabateans is that they were largely a peaceful civilization, which is one of the reasons that I enjoyed looking into their history so much. So this is roughly the area of interest, and the two places we're going to be talking about particularly today are Hegra, which I also call AlUla, and Nabataean Civilisation. AlUla is actually the region, and Nabataean Civilisation is the old Islamic name, which I'll explain. But Hegra in Saudi Arabia, modern-day Saudi Arabia, and Petra in Jordan. Now, I love camels, so there are going to be lots of gratuitous pictures of camels just because I can, but also because they were so integral to the trade at that time. This is actually taken after the dry expedition, which I talked to some of you about. This is in the Sahara, and it was a continuation. So these are my camels. Hamish at the front, Callum in the middle, and Alistair at the end. So once you've used camels for something like an expedition, you will have an unbounded admiration for them. And I think one of the things I really enjoy about talking about civilizations that use trade is that I myself have done like month-long, well, 7.5 months with these animals, living with them, seeing what it would have been like all those centuries ago. The Nabateans. The reason I think that we know so little about them is that they left very, very few written records, almost none, which is extraordinary. They were contemporaneous with the Romans and the pharaohs. Now, have we got any Mary Beard fans in the house? Yeah, we love her. She has so much material. The Romans recorded everything, didn't they? They recorded what they drank, what they ate, who they slept with, what they did. I mean, they literally recorded everything. The Nabateans, on the other hand, have left no written records, almost none. And it's extraordinary to me because this is the Library of Alexandria, the great library. That is at the same time as this civilization was at its peak. So one of the great mysteries is why were there no records? But the good news is what it meant was me and Joe could go and do a huge amount of detective work. So I'm going to caveat, everything I say could be disproved next month when they discover the actual scripts of what they did and what they didn't do. But what we had to do was try and work with experts, work with proof that we have, and then build a story. So let's start. For those of you, who's been to Petra? Okay, sit back. Anyone who hasn't been to Petra, you'll be booking a flight. Sit back and enjoy this moment, because if you've been to Petra, you'll remember it. This is the money shot. from Petra. Wait until you see this. So this is the treasury in Petra, which is the great, great city of the Nabateans. You walk through a very long, narrow gorge. It's the only way I can describe it. And then you're walking through the darkness. There's a sliver of light at the end. And then you come round and it's like, wow. And honestly, if you don't say wow when you see the treasury at Petra, then there's definitely something wrong with you. As I say, today we'll be talking about Petra. And we'll be talking about Hegra, or AlUla, in Saudi Arabia. This is what the Nabateans left us. They left us two magnificent cities of the dead. Spectacular, stunning, huge, unbelievable feats of engineering. And it makes me wonder, why did they concentrate so much on the afterlife? Were their gods particularly needy? So, brings me again to Joe, who loves seeing his picture up there. So I made this program with Turn TV, based here in Glasgow. And the way television works is companies produce product for people like the BBC. And one of the things I really enjoyed about this, so Joe is the holder of the story, I call him HOTS. And what that means is he is the overall person who shapes the script, who does the shooting, who does the edit. So he really is the genius behind these lovely programs. And what we did in this case was we hired two local crews. The top crew there you see in Saudi Arabia, Saudis, and the bottom crew is in Jordan. And just to share some insider secrets with you, it was very funny because when we went to Jordan, all of the crew had just been working on Dune, you know, the huge Hollywood film. So they were really like, oh, Nabateans. Because they were used to Hollywood blockbusters, so they were totally unimpressed by us, but really lovely to work with. And then the Saudis, on the contrary, were ecstatic to be in AlUla and Hegra. Most of them hadn't been there before, and they were really interested in the story and really getting into it. But one of the things about working with local crew is no matter how much I love the Middle East, I speak Arabic, I live in North Africa, I'm not from the country, and you just get extra insight, and I think you get extra richness. So, for example, you see the guy with the fluffy boom at the top, Hassan. Our first kind of sequence coming out of Jordan was showing the trade route. So we were going to drive along it, and the initial plan was I was going to sit in the passenger seat, the camera, Joe was behind me, there was the driver, and I was going to talk about this being the route, you know, that in the past they'd have gone with camels. And Hassan said, no, he said, why don't you drive it, Alice? Because it will show people without having to tell them that women are free to drive in Saudi Arabia now that things are changing. And actually it was a genius idea because it's exactly what it did. So it's kind of the very beginning, and I'm in Saudi Arabia and I am quite nervous. I've never driven this car before. It's ginormous. So I get in the front and I have to talk to camera safely. So there's quite a lot going on in my head. And what made me really laugh is the guy who owned the truck, who was our fixer, he's lying down at Joe's feet in the back seat because he's so nervous that I'm going to crash. So there you go, that's what it's like on the inside. Petra. I think why did they choose that geographic location? Now, I know I should be able to answer that question for you, especially in this particular company. It's a bit of a mystery to me and to all of us, why they chose Petra. It isn't surrounded by lots of water, by lots of agriculture. There is, as you can see, I don't know if you can see this lady here, she's a shepherdess. So when I took this picture, she was actually taking her goats from one end to the other. In front of these magnificent temples of the king. There are flocks, but it's very arid. There's only a little water. And the thing that seems to make sense is that they chose that environment either for religious reasons, which have not yet been discovered, possibly, or because it was so easy to defend. These guys made their money from trade. They were rich. And the great thing about Petra is that, ladies, if you were standing in that seek in the narrow corridor with two spears, you could probably see off this lot. especially if I was on top throwing down rocks. It's very, very easy to defend. So I wonder if that was the reason. When we were doing our show, we were really trying to find out how the Nabateans lived, what kind of people they were. And as I say, without the written records, we had to extrapolate and look at what we could see, look at the evidence and try and come to conclusions. And one of the things I came to the conclusion is that they were a tolerant and a kind of porous people. And I think you can see that very clearly in this first part when Dr. Sammy, a bit of our silver fox, is describing the treasury.
The building is absolutely wonderful and amazing, but it seems to me to have taken things from different cultures.
Nabateans, because of the trade routes, traveled all over the ancient world. They left Petra as traders, and they came back as engineers, as architects, as astronomists. They learned a lot.
So this facade has
Yes.
all influences from all the ancient cultures. Starting from the very top, for example, in the middle between the two central columns, this was Isis, the Egyptian goddess. The pyramid
Yes.
itself in the middle, that is Greek. While on top of the upper angle of the pyramid, there's kind of tabula or table.
Yes.
Right in the middle is the solar disk, surrounded by two horns of the Egyptian cow, Hathor, and two barley or wheat ears on both sides. And this to represent the fertility and the richness, the wealth of the Nabateans.
This was their statement, with
Right.
which they stated themselves squarely with all the other cultures by saying, this is who we are.
Quite a big statement.
It's an icon, it's an amazing interpretation for who they were.
And it is an amazing statement, isn't it? I think when they built this 2,000 years ago, I mean, they built it by hand. And it's absolutely enormous. They built it from the top down. And look, can you see the little holes where the workers used to climb up? I mean, it's quite extraordinary. But what you see from there is that they went out, they traded all over the world, they went out and then they brought back elements from the places they'd been to and they incorporated them into their own culture. That is very different, if you think about it, in religious terms, from religions which go out and proselytize, which do mission, which believe only in their own religion and their own God and their own prophets. This is a very, very different approach. As I said, there will be gratuitous shots of camels. However, the reason I'm showing them is that camels were completely fundamental to their trade. And here are just some of the trade routes that we know of, the Nabateans. They really made their money, the vast quantity, the largest part of it, from the myrrh and frankincense trade, because they had a monopoly of it. So it's produced in what is now Yemen and Oman, and then they either took it by sea or by land all the way up, and you can see Nabatean Civilisation there, which is Hegra or AlUla, and then up to Petra, onto the two ports that they used of Gaza and Alexandria. So it went over that way into Africa, up into Europe and onto Rome, and it was also used in that whole Levantine area. So that's where they got their main cash from, and they were wealthy. They were also on the other trade routes. The Silk Road kind of skirted across a bit at the top. They were sailors and they were land movers. And what's very exciting is that you see where Nabatean Civilisation is, and then you've got the Red Sea. There is a lost Nabatean port somewhere on the Red Sea. And sure, I keep thinking I have to go back, because surely if you just walk straight across, because logistically you're not going to want to spend lots of time wandering around, you just go straight across. It's got to be somewhere in that kind of patch, I reckon a 10K patch, and you could find it. So that's one of the things that's still to be explored and discovered. Oop. This is Little Petra. So this is where the sharp end of business took place. And if you imagine that this is the corridor in, if you imagine roughly, if this photo extended, roughly where I am, your merchants would arrive from all over the world. They would park their camels, unload some of their goods or all of their goods, and then they'd walk in this long, narrow corridor, usually accompanied by city officials, because they were very much welcomed. This was like, the traders were important to the city, so they were VIPs. And there they'd be taken into the trading post. Now, the glory of the caves is, although it looks very sparse and very spare, if you think about climate and environment, these are warm in winter and cool in summer, because the temperatures reach 48 or so in Jordan easily in the summer, and in the winter it's very cold. So the caves were an ideal kind of habitat, and they've been carefully carved out. You can see that. This is the seating area here, those three things, and I want you to imagine now that seating area covered in carpets and ostrich feather cushions. Because at that time there were a lot of ostriches and they used the feathers for cushions, which seems incredibly luxurious to me. At the side you can see a water bowl or receptacle where they'd have been able to wash. And then just at the very edge there, that's going into the other room, which would have been the kitchen, where they'd have had food and drink prepared for them. So the merchants were very much looked after, welcomed, and able to rest after their long journey. And they liked a bit of decoration. This is exactly opposite that cave. There's a fresco on the ceiling. And there's so few bits of plaster left in Petra. This is one of the only ones. And as you can see, I mean, to me, it's not very Arab at all, really. It's got a fat, naked cherub playing a flute, I guess, a dove, and one of the other ones, which I haven't been able to show on this slide, is a naked lady, which seems very exotic. So they obviously were people who were artistic, who liked luxury, and who were wealthy. However, there's another side. Sadly, in every adventurer's life, there are stairs, and these ones are going to lead me to the high place of sacrifice in the city of Petra. A bit worried about that high place. The sun is burning down on us, just had lunch, and now it's time to climb. It's a really long way up. Did anyone else walk it when they went? There's plenty of stairs and it was very hot. Anyway, we got to the top. So this is where in Petra we really wanted to try and discover more about the gods and the religion that was practiced. And this is one of the gods. They had female and male gods. Tushara was the main male one, and then Uzza and AlUla were the main female ones. And they were pagans. They worshipped lots of different gods. What's interesting as well is because for the Nabateans, I'm also interested in how does that link forward into the next cultures of Islam and further into the modern day. Now, these are the gods. This is the reason why Salman Rushdie was so brutally attacked and injured, because these are the gods of the satanic verses. What happened is when the Quran, as Muslims believe, when the Quran was revealed to Muhammad, he got tempted by the devil. If you think about it politically, he was living in Mecca and Medina, very rich merchant areas, and the merchants still worshipped these gods, Uzza, AlUla, and Dafshur. So they worshipped these gods. And what happened was when Muhammad revealed the Quran to people, he said at one point, and these gods can intercede for Allah, can intercede to Allah for you as humans. But the problem is that is against the absolute basis of the Islamic faith, which is nobody can come between a person and God. That the only person who can intercede to God for that person is themselves. There are no layers. Nobody can do that. So there was a kind of a religious, and did he do it for political reasons to get all the merchants on side? I don't know. But what happened was those verses, which are called the satanic verses, because the belief is that Satan tempted Muhammad to make a mistake, were taken out of the Quran. That's what Salman Rushdie based his book title on. That's why the fatwa was released, because it's a very, very sensitive issue, because it goes to the heart of what the Muslims believe. Not that most Muslims support kind of stabbing people. So those are the gods that carried through. And here's Dr. Fawzi. So Dr. Fawzi is going to talk to us about the deities. He says deities, the deities, and what we know about them. He is a really esteemed professor in Jordan. He's very well known. Actually, he studied also in Scotland. So he's very fond of Scotland. And he is passionate about his subject, and one of the things that Joe can tell you as well is when we were going around, Dr. Sami and Dr. Fauzi trained almost all the tourist guides that now the historic tour guides who work in Petra. So it was amazing. We kept getting people coming up and shaking hands, and it's very deferential culture, so kissing and saying, "Oh, Professor, how are you? How are you?" So we got masses of kudos just by being with these guys. And I think what's interesting is, even for someone at the height of information about this empire, how much we have to kind of extrapolate.
To your deities, and we know that the Nabatean religion was based on worshipping solar deities. So this is a high spot, a nice place
the sun.
to look to the heaven, to the sun, and they sacrificed animals during certain occasions, like the festivals or feasts related to their deities.
So you'd come up these steps.
Maybe this is the last part of the festival.
They could have walked around here, couldn't they?
Yeah. This was a common practice in the Nabatean period, and you could make
like
circumambulation.
Exactly.
Circumambulation, like around the Kaaba in our time. You could do this,
got the water.
and maybe you get the blessings from the priest, like, pouring some water or blood.
be.
We don't know what was going on.
At 170 meters, this is one of the highest places in Petra. It does feel like it would have been a perfect spot to worship a sun god. But even with experts like Dr. Sami and Dr. Fauzi to guide us, the Nabatean civilization keeps its secrets close.
Petra is so magnificent and so visible, and yet there's so many unanswered questions. Why is that? Why do we know so relatively little about this magnificent civilization?
Because unfortunately, we don't have a Nabatean historiography, because the lack of written evidence, the lack of inscriptions, all of the main monuments in Petra, they don't have inscriptions. One of the explanations for that, saying that they were covered with plaster, with stucco, and painted, and most likely inscriptions were written on that.
But did they leave any written evidence, like on some form of paper or papyrus?
So I think they must have written, because we know that the Nabatean community was well organized. Probably in the future we could find something, and as one archaeologist said, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Wise words. So maybe somewhere there is an absolute treasure trove of scrolls of information, and we will find it. I mean, Dr. Fauzi thinks so, and I trust him. Going on now, so what we tried to do in Petra, the way Joe looked at it and formed it, was we tried to find out the big things like the trade, the religion, those big subjects. And what we wanted to do in AlUla in Saudi Arabia was to go in a bit more granularly and try and find out a bit more about how they lived. Now again, it really is looking for clues and then trying to make deductions from those clues. So did we get it right? I hope we got some of it right. And that was for me personally, that was the real excitement of it, because I like to explore, I'd like to adventure, I like to find things out for myself. And that's what I think we were really able to do in this second part. So why did they choose, as opposed to Petra, why did they choose AlUla to build their second great city? It's night and day. It's absolutely obvious, because they've got loads of water and they've got these incredible date oases. So this is all date palms. And dates, as we all know, are a superfood. And let's quiz you. How many dates do you need per day to keep alive? 10. Very good guess. Fewer. 6. Higher. A little bit higher. The answer is 7. So allegedly, as you can see, I haven't tried this diet, you need 7 dates a day to keep alive. But they are fantastically rich, both in nutrients, but also just in calories and sugar. And if any of you do any running or walking, I mean, dates are just such a fantastic food to keep you going. So there's no secret as to why they chose this part of Saudi Arabia for their city. It's on the route from the south to the north, and you could get your camel's fat again, you could stock up on food for the next part, and there's loads of water. Talking of which, it's been at least 3 minutes. There's been no camels. Camels are the center of this story because you need food, you need water, and you need transport. And this is it. I'm in my happy place. Look at their little curious faces.
ما تستعمل الجمل للركاب أو
للركوب
للحم؟
فنستخدم للركوب كانوا يستخدمونه قديما برضه للتنقل للسفر للحمل نقل الأغراض
نعم.
فحنا وجودها متعة.
Saad was just telling me how important these camels are, and it's not just about what they can produce and what they can give, it's also that they're very much a part of his culture and his family's culture, and in fact the culture that brought us the Nabatean Empire.
And of course, their produce is appreciated too.
الهدية هذه
وريني.
لا عادي على يدك يلا.
Okay, هنا وهذا.
ايوه يلا.
So for the Nabateans, they would have had female camels in the camel train, they would have had baby camels would have been born along the route, and they would have had this milk as well as the dates, which is absolutely delicious.
يلا هذه انت بحلبها.
Ship of the desert, it's like a cliche, but in fact it's the truth. And without these, there would be no trade, there would be no tombs, there would be no Hegra, there would be no Petra. This is what enabled the Nabateans to trade. And they're beautiful.
Camels have got a very, very special place in the whole culture of this region. They are considered the highest animal in the Quran. The Quran, they kind of grade things. Camels are up there at the top. Also very high are ants, which people like for their organization, or I should say God likes for their organization. But in modern Saudi, people still have camels, even though they don't use them still for transporting across the desert. They still keep them. They are absolutely a very important way for people to express their desert identity. And I had a very exciting experience. There's this thing called the King Fahd Camel Cup, which is, if you imagine in races, it's like the Grand National. And it's not about racing camels, it's about the camel itself. So you're judging the quality of the camel. And I was invited by the Camel Club to go and visit the gentleman who has won it 10 times. He's won this cup 10 times. And he is a billionaire. So I arrived at his house, and it was incredibly embarrassing because I had to take my shoes off, obviously, to go in. And when I looked down, I realized I had a big hole in my sock. I was like, oh, okay. And then we went out in his 4x4, and we went through, he had hundreds of camels just roaming. He had a big ranch roaming around, and he was showing me his different camels. And he was being really lovely and polite and kind to me, but, you know, just a little bit of distance. And then he showed me a whole group of female camels, and I went, oh, she is so beautiful, I love her. And his face lit up, and he went, you have chosen wisely. She is worth £1 million. And I was like, oh. So if you want to know what makes a camel beautiful or, you know, I don't know, better than another camel, there are certain things to look for, and I'll give you 3 so that if you're ever in a similar position, you'll know what to look for. The first thing is a big droopy bottom lip, which seems a bit odd. They like really big droopy bottom lips. The chest should be very well formed. So, you know, like any animal, it's like very expansive and well set up, and also small ears set forward on the head. So now you know, and do wear new socks. That's the other thing. But back to the Nabateans. Here we are in the Siq, the equivalent of that amazing passageway in Jordan that goes on for a couple of kilometers. This is a very small one in AlUla. And one of the things to notice here is these niches. Do you see them? 1, 2. That was where you put your traveling gods. So you brought your little statue with you, and then you put it in there. And something very odd, if you I tried it out. If you whisper into one of those niches, you can hear it at the very back of that diwan, the big seating area there, that cave. The site at Hegra, AlUla, is totally different from Petra. It's out in the desert. You couldn't defend, ladies, you couldn't defend this one. It really is the opposite. You've still got these huge rock formations, but you don't have that kind of narrow passageway situation. And here you can see some of the tombs. It's carved into the stone there. These ones here, remember these as well, because Hinat, who I'll show you later, she was uncovered, her bones were uncovered there. And the Diwan is a bit further back. But as you can see, a very wide geographical landscape, a very wide environment, very open. Your camel trains could have come in from any direction from the south. So they must have felt secure there, because there was certainly no way to defend it. One of the great things about this site is that Saudi Arabia is really, really trying to explore it and find out what's going on and prioritizing it for research, which is a huge turnaround and is actually quite indicative of how Saudi Arabia itself is changing. Previously, and until quite recently, there was a fatwa, another fatwa, on this site. It was considered an accursed place, and Muslims were not meant to go there. And the reason is that the original inhabitants, way back when, were unbelievers. And the Prophet Saleh went to them to try and convert them to the ways of Allah. And they didn't believe him. They're like, oh, whatever, you know, you say one God, we say lots of gods, we're not interested. They said, show us a sign. If you're a prophet, give us a sign. So Saleh, direct line to God, gave them a sign. And he turned a rock into a female camel. But they still weren't satisfied, and so they hamstrung the camel and killed it. And when God saw what they'd done with his very generous gift, he was furious, as he had every right to be, and he destroyed the people. So since that time, it was considered a wicked place, a cursed place, and Muslims weren't allowed to go. Then in the 1980s, when Saudi Arabia got its oil wealth, started to change, even then, they started to look into it, and that momentum has been building. And now it's really one of the kind of jewels in Saudi's crown. They're trying to attract tourists, and it's really worth a visit. So there is lots of money being spent on research, which is fantastic from our point of view, because this is where we got to get more clues about how they lived. So this area is actually a residential area, but it has not yet been excavated. And Dr. Jan, who you're about to see, is a very impressive person, because you'll see me pushing what I call Betty, a little lawnmower, and that technology he also has used for space missions in North America with NASA. So the latest technology being used to try and discover the secrets of the Nabateans.
What are we doing here? Tell me all about this.
This is a ground-penetrating radar system, and the idea here is that we're moving this back and forth over the ground in very close space lines.
So if you were a human, would this be like we're doing a full body scan?
Essentially, much like an X-ray, to look at the whole site and find specific areas where they'd be interested in.
Katja, what are you hoping to find out from this site?
Right, so obviously we can't excavate the whole city, so it's much better to document it and then ask a very fine question, which is, how did the city develop? We know the Nabateans came here in the mid-1st century BC. Now, when they came, did they do an urban plan that was what we call the hypodaemian system, which is when you already lay out the cities in a very grid-like system? Did it develop in a much more organic way? I mean, this is like the two sides of the debate.
And what kind of area here are you looking at?
Eventually, when this program really kicks off, we're going to be doing the entire city of Hegra. So that involves walking about 2,000 kilometers, which is the distance from here to Athens.
You know I want to have a go.
Absolutely. I know I want you to have a go because I'm tired.
Okay.
By all means. So much like a lawnmower, I just want you to push it at whatever pace you want to go, just like mowing a lawn.
And just dead straight if I can. It's quite
Absolutely.
bumpy.
Now, of course, it's very bumpy. Do what you can to keep it straight. So now we're collecting data, and what we're doing is essentially like taking a knife and cutting through the ground and seeing everything that's there.
So there you go. So using this incredible sensing imagery to see what's underneath before they start scraping away all the sand. And I'm very proud to say that on the little bit that I lawn mowed, we actually made a very interesting discovery. We found two structures, one on top of the other, which means that either there were like two houses effectively, one on top of the other. So there must have been at least two stages to life to habitation in the city. There's more to come. Just think that there's some poor archaeology intern somewhere who's going to have to push that for 2,000 kilometers. Dr. Jonathan, this was one of the things that I probably enjoyed the most in the program, is that trying to understand the people. You know, we know that they were traders, we know who they worshipped, we know that they built their houses within the tombs or near to the tombs, but trying to get an idea of who they were is much more difficult, as I say, with no writing, no kind of clues. So he is the curator of the Museum of AlUla, and when we went, it was really exciting, so we were allowed to go behind the scenes, and he just pulled out these enormous kind of filing cabinets about as high as this room, stuffed with artifacts and bones and fossils. It was amazing. But here I am holding a plaster skull, and what they wanted to do, what the authorities wanted to do, was try and recreate a Nabatean to get an idea of them. So in the tomb I showed you earlier was the remains of a woman that they called Hinat, and they think she was a kind of middle-aged-ish, middle-class-ish woman. So they chose her to do a reconstruction for, and they went all kind of bones or silent witness on us, and they reconstructed her face using her skull. They had her skeleton for, you know, height and approximate weight and age, and then they had a forensic reconstructor make a face, and this is what they came up with. So this is Hinat, and when I saw her first, I was really quite touched because she looks so real, and it brings it kind of to life. Oop. I'll let you see her. She's beautiful, no? And this is where the detective work comes in. So what could we find out about the Nabateans from this reconstruction, from the skull? We could find out that they ate bread almost daily, and that they used the system, which is, when I walked across the Sahara, the Dra and the Sahara, I found these stones, so they're still in use, which are fret stones. You use them for the wheat, and they're long oblong shapes like that, and you basically either dig a hole and compact the sand, or you can use a stone, or you could use a wooden bowl, and you crush the wheat underneath to make bread. But what that does, it leaves tiny, tiny fragments of stone and or sand in the bread, and that wears down people's teeth. So typically they would find that their teeth were worn down by this. So there's the clue, and then you can work out what they ate and how they ate it. She also, this particular woman, there's tiny details about her as a person. She had an abscess in one of her teeth, and also she had a touch of arthritis. So, I mean, this is 2,000 years ago, and yet we can know that kind of granular detail about a person. One of the things we were very interested to explore was the position of women in society. And we knew from the sources, although there were no contemporary Nabatean sources, there are Greeks and there are Romans who wrote about them. And so we have some information from those. But we also have, again, the evidence. So here, it's very difficult to see, but here on this tiny coin are two heads. One is male and one is female. It's the king and the queen. The heads are the same size, they're in the same position, which would indicate that they're equals and that they're together, that the woman is being given equal importance as the man. And there are obviously thousands of other coins. And what we discovered from those coins, from the dating, from the pictures, is that women could also be queens, which is the highest position in society. We knew from the sources that they could be priestesses, they could be traders. We knew from the tombs that they could buy a tomb and keep it for themselves and for their daughters. One of the tombs inscribed, this is for, I can't remember her name now, but this is for XXX and her daughters. No one else is allowed to be buried here. But from these coins, we could work out, or we could see that they were also given the very highest job in society, which is to be the queen, and that the queen could pass the monarchy, the crown, down to her daughter, because we've got that in the chain, which is amazing. I mean, honestly, if you think of Europe, you know, we were quite far behind on that. This is 2,000 years ago. So we know from this that women did have influence at the highest level of society, and they were from there. And I mean, bear in mind that this culture was born out of the desert. It was a nomadic culture. They were nomadic Arabs surviving on dates with their camels, and then they grew, they traded, they became rich, they settled, but their basis was very much that nomadic basis. And here's a modern day Saudi woman. Now I apologize because the sound is really low, but I'm going to try and let you hear her, and then I'll tell you what she said in case you couldn't hear it. It is very, very low. This is Wadad, who was our guide, a young Saudi woman. You can see she's in her very chic ranger's outfit. And what you can't see is she also had this amazing bush hat that she wore. And just to see that she, 20 years ago in Saudi, the religious police were going around beating you if you were wearing immodest dress. And now you have young women showing foreigners around one of their ruins that used to be closed. The country is genuinely there is a cultural revolution going on, and it's fascinating to watch. And for someone like Wadad, of course, it's wonderful. Wadad, how long have you been a guide?
Around 2 years.
Okay, and do you like your job?
I love it.
Why do you love your job?
Meeting very interesting people first, like you, Alice. It's been wonderful. We had fun filming the documentary, and to share the story of the Nabateans or the Dadanite with the rest of the world. Since it's recently open, we are very honored to be the first one to share the stories with the whole world.
And do you feel a connection with the Nabateans because they're your ancestors, maybe?
We do, actually. We feel that we are ambassador, and we are representing our ancestors here to tell their untold stories.
So basically what Wadad is saying, and I do apologize for the sound, is that she loves her job and that she feels like she's an ambassador for the Nabateans. Bear in mind, this was a place that you weren't allowed to visit until a couple of decades ago. She feels that, look at her face, look how happy she is, look how young and free and beautiful she is, and she is there to kind of interpret this culture for us, and at the same time to tell us about her own culture. And does she feel a link to the Nabateans? Well, she's descended from them. This is us sitting in the Diwan, which is the king's court. And again, as I said, I'm always trying to find links or possible links between the past and the present. And what we found here is that the Nabateans, as far as we know, did not use slaves. They seem to have been a relatively peaceful civilization, and they didn't use slaves. Now, if you think contemporaneous with the pharaohs, they used slaves, and the Romans, who were nicking people from all over the world to use as slaves, then you've got the Nabateans who don't, which is in itself of interest. This is where the king would hold court, and there were very specific rules that we found from the sources laid down. And the one I like the best is that he used to serve his guests with his own hands. And if I can take you back to my lovely Saudi billionaire and his camels, after we'd seen the camels, when I got my shoes back on, he had laid out a carpet at the top of on the sand at the top of his farm, and there was a charcoal fire burning. And with his own hands, and bear in mind, he's so much more important than me, truthfully, in the world. And yet with his own hands, he made the coffee and served me the coffee, because that is the tradition in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle Eastern region, is that your host serves the guests, that guests trump everything. Guests, they say, duyufallah, guests are from God. And I think that's one of the things that I absolutely love about this culture, is that feeling that guests are so important, that you have to welcome people, that you have to embrace them. And the king as well, imagine he's serving his guests with wine, because they drank wine. How many cups of wine would you like to drink with King Charles? Lady in green, how many cups of wine would you like to drink with King Charles? 1. Oh, come on. Surely, is there anyone who's going to raise me 1? 2. Well, according to Nabatean good manners, there was a limit. It's quite a high limit. You could only drink 11 cups of wine with the king. So, I mean, they must have been quite raucous parties, although I suppose the cups could have been small. So that's the kind of things we were able to discover as we were going through. But this issue of no script drove me crazy, like no written records drove me crazy. So this is my bit of the talk. This has got nothing to do with the program. This is my bit of the talk where I get to share my passion with you. Just further down the road, a couple of kilometers down the road, is this incredible place, which is called the biggest open-air library in the world. And in it, there are thousands of inscriptions, thousands and thousands on the rocks. And they're very faint up there for you. Don't worry, I'm going to show you a close-up. There's script, there's petroglyphs, there's everything you can imagine in lots of different languages from various ancient civilizations. There's so many, you'd love it, there's so many civilizations. And I was like, well, this clearly is going to be the source of all our information about, it's okay, we don't have any papyrus, we don't have any books, but we've got all these inscriptions. Unfortunately, the vast majority of them basically say Muhammad was here. So there isn't as much information as you could wish, but I did find something that I found genuinely exciting. So before I show you, I'll show you now. Okay. Can you see the two figures? This one and this one. You see the man with his legs out and his arms upstretched. Now, I live in Morocco. I live in an Amazigh community. Amazigh is the correct word for Berber, but I'll say Berber. And this is one of the symbols. This is in the Berber language, this symbol. In fact, it's the Berber national flag. So when I saw this, I got incredibly excited. And I was saying, Joe, look, this is clear evidence and proof, it was still in my detective mode. This is clear proof that there was trade with Morocco. People from my village could have come here. Look, you can see the Berber free man. They've carved it on there to leave their mark. This shows you, that there was trade between the Amazigh nation and the Nabateans. And it might be true, although I've since found out that this symbol is used quite a lot. But at that time, the Amazigh nation covered the whole of North Africa, down into West Africa, and right across the Sinai. So it is definitely possible. And I would just like to present you the final evidence, Malad, which I think seals the case. This is the Berber national flag. Hold on. But Joe wouldn't let me leave it in the program, even though I think it was true. So just to finish off with, just to give you a little feeling of what it was like to be there, I think, as I say, what we were able to discover was certain things about how they lived, certain things about what they ate, the status of women, interesting little kind of factlets, like they had ostrich feather cushions and they could drink 11 cups of wine. But those other things that link them more with the modern day, the hospitality, the satanic verses, that it was those gods. I think any knowledge of a civilization that you can bring into your modern day world helps enrich our understanding of who we are as humans. And excuse the wind, by the way, desert wind. But look how incredible these formations are. So that was the site. And if you do get the chance to go to Petra, there's now flights between, basically Petra and AlUla, between Jordan and AlUla, so you could go and see both sites. I would say that the thing you can do now that you can't do in lots of other places is you can discover things for yourself. 60% of Petra is unexcavated, so you can just go in, have a look for stuff. Here, what we didn't have time to see, but I saw, because I've been before, is on the tops of lots of these promontories, you can see graves just sitting there. You can see little staircases going up the side, and they still haven't been catalogued. There is just so much to find out. So please do watch the program, Arabian Adventures. There it is on iPlayer. It's got lots more in it. And stay in touch. Thank you very much.